The sterile scent of antiseptic clung to everything, a stark contrast to the Chanel No. 5 that usually perfumed her world. Cordelia Hayes drifted in a sea of anesthesia. The last memory she held dear, being her husband's kiss, a promise whispered against her temple. "I'll be right here when you open your eyes." He was her rock, the celebrated tech millionaire, Richard Sterling. But when her eyelids fluttered open, the man in the bespoke suit sitting vigil was not her husband. He was a stranger, with eyes like polished obsidian, and the promise Richard made was the first of many lies to unravel. The view from the penthouse was Richard Sterling's favorite party trick. From the 72nd floor of their 157 apartment Central Park, sprawled below like a manicured green carpet, a perfect rectangle of nature hemmed in by the relentless ambition of Manhattan. He loved to stand by the floor-to-ceiling windows, a glass of Macallan 25 in hand, and gesture to the city as if he'd personally arranged every skyscraper. "We made it." Cora, he'd say, his arm wrapping securely around Cordelia's waist, his chin resting on her hair. Top of the world. To Cordelia, it often felt less like the top of the world, and more like a beautifully appointed cage. The apartment was a symphony of minimalist luxury, gleaming marble floors, artfully distressed concrete walls, and furniture that looked more like sculpture than something a person could comfortably sit on. It was Rick's taste, curated by a designer he'd poached from a rival billionaire. Cordelia's own touch was confined to the small library, where worn paperbacks and her collection of antique maps felt wonderfully rebelliously out of place. Their life to the outside world was an object of intense envy, a modern fairy tale chronicled in the glossy pages of Vanity Fair and Forbes. Richard Sterling, the wunderkind CEO of Sterling Innovations, had disrupted the data security industry with his proprietary algorithm Aegis. He was handsome, charismatic, and by all accounts utterly devoted to his lovely wife Cordelia, a former art historian he'd met at a gallery fundraiser. Now, 6 months pregnant with their first child, Cordelia felt the gilded bars of her cage pressing in. The pregnancy had been difficult, categorized as high risk from the start, due to a rare placental condition. Their son, whom they'd already named Arthur, was a fighter, but his very survival depended on a groundbreaking in utero surgery scheduled for the following week at Lenox Hill Hospital. Dr. Anya Sharma, the best fetal surgeon in the country, had been flown in from the Mayo Clinic. Rick had spared no expense, a fact he mentioned often. "Only the best for my boy," he'd declared, signing off on the astronomical private medical fees without a second glance. "And for my wife." He was the perfect concerned husband. He massaged her swollen ankles, catered to her late-night cravings for pickles and mango sorbet, and held her when the anxiety became a physical weight on her chest. Yet lately there were fissures in his perfect facade, hairline cracks that only she seemed to notice. There were the phone calls. He would take them in his home office, the heavy sound-proofed door clicking shut behind him. His voice, usually so warm and resonant, would drop to a low, clipped murmur. When he emerged, his smile would be a little too bright, his posture a little too rigid. "Just business, honey," he'd say, kissing her forehead, "putting out fires." The usual. The fires seemed to be raging more often. The company was on the verge of a massive public offering, and he claimed the pressure was immense. Then there was the matter of Zara Vance. She was his new COO, a sharp, impeccably dressed woman with an MBA from Wharton and an unnerving intensity in her gaze. Cordelia had met her a few times at company events. Zara was all professional deference to her face, but Cordelia had caught the way she looked at Rick when she thought no one was watching, a look of possessive familiarity that went far beyond the boardroom. Cordelia had once brought it up gently. "Zara seems very dedicated to you," she'd ventured. Rick had laughed it off. "She's dedicated to the company, Cora. She's a killer, and I need that right now. Don't let your hormones make you paranoid." The word paranoid stung a casual dismissal that made her feel foolish and small. She let it go. She had to trust him. Trust was the foundation of their marriage, the bedrock beneath the dizzying heights of their life. The night before the surgery, a storm broke over the city, lashing rain against the vast windows. Rick was packing a small leather carry-on. "I hate this timing, I really do," he said, his back to her. "This meeting in Geneva is non-negotiable. The Swiss consortium is our biggest potential investor for the IPO. I have to be there to close it." Cordelia's heart sank. "You're leaving tonight." He turned his face a mask of remorse. "My flight is at dawn. I'll be back in 48 hours tops. I promise. I'll be on the first plane back the second the papers are signed. I'll call the hospital the moment I land. Dr. Sharma knows the situation." He knelt before her chair, taking her hands in his. His hands were always so warm. "My heart will be right here with you and Arthur. Every second." Something cold snaked around her own heart. "Rick, please." "Can't it wait? Just 2 days, if I don't go. The deal collapses," he said, his voice firm but gentle. "This is for us, Cora. For our future. For Arthur's future. So he never has to worry about a single thing." He framed her face with his hands, his blue eyes earnest and compelling. "I love you more than anything. You know that, right?" She nodded, swallowing the lump of fear in her throat. He was right. He was building an empire for them. This was the price of that empire. She was being selfish. Later that night, as he slept beside her, his phone buzzed on the nightstand. The screen lit up for a fleeting second. Cordelia, awake with a mixture of nerves and discomfort, saw the preview of the message. It was from Zara Vance. "Everything is in place. Wheels up at 6 a.m. See you on the other side. See you on the other side." It sounded so final, so ominous. Cordelia's breath hitched, but then she rationalized it away. Of course, Zara was going to Geneva with him. She was the COO. It was a business trip. On the other side meant after the deal was done. Her mind, frayed by anxiety, was inventing conspiracies. She curled up against her husband's back, willing herself to believe in the man she loved, the man who had promised to build their world brick by gilded brick. She closed her eyes and prayed for the morning, for the surgery to be a success, and for the safe return of the man who was her entire world. The morning arrived grey and sullen, the city shrouded in a damp mist that mirrored the fog in Cordelia's mind. The ride to Lenox Hill was silent, the plush interior of the Rolls-Royce, suddenly feeling claustrophobic. Rick held her hand, his thumb tracing soothing circles on her skin, but his attention was elsewhere. He kept glancing at his Patek Philippe watch, a nervous energy thrumming just beneath his calm exterior. "You'll be great, Cora. You're the strongest person I know," he murmured, as they pulled up to the private entrance of the hospital's maternity wing, an entrance reserved for those who measured their privacy in dollars. "I wish you were staying," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I know." "God." "I know," he said, his voice thick with what sounded like genuine regret. "I'll be watching my phone. Your mom will be here soon, and Alistair will be in the waiting room." Alistair Finch was Rick's personal lawyer, a stoic man who had been with him since the beginning. His presence seemed an odd choice for a hospital vigil, but Rick had insisted he be there to handle any and all paperwork, just in case. Inside a private suite that looked more like a room at the Four Seasons was waiting for her. Nurses bustled around with quiet efficiency. Cordelia changed into a standard-issue hospital gown that felt rough against her skin, a humbling piece of cotton in a world of cashmere and silk. The anesthesiologist, a kind-faced man named Dr. Evans, came in to explain the procedure. He spoke of epidurals and general anesthesia in a calm, reassuring tone. But his words swam in Cordelia's ears. All she could focus on was the rhythmic beat of the fetal heart monitor, the steady thump, thump, thump that was her son's life force, her anchor. Rick stayed until the very last moment. When the orderly arrived with the gurney, he leaned down and kissed her a long, lingering press of his lips against hers. "I love you," he whispered into her hair. "Fight for our boy. I'll be on a plane before you even wake up. I'll be right here." He touched her cheek, his gaze intense. "I promise." That was the last she saw of him. His handsome face, etched with concern, framed in the doorway, before he turned and walked away, his confident stride never faltering. The journey to the operating theatre was a blur of fluorescent lights and sterile corridors. She was transferred to the operating table, a narrow, cold surface in the center of a room, filled with gleaming steel and complex machinery. Faces in blue scrubs and masks hovered above her, their eyes kind but distant. Dr. Sharma, a woman with a formidable reputation and surprisingly gentle hands, gave her arm a reassuring squeeze. "We're going to take very good care of you and Arthur Cordelia," she said. "Just relax and count backward from 100. Dr. Evans fitted a mask over her face. The scent of antiseptic plastic filled her nostrils. 100. She began, her voice a fragile thread of sound. Her thoughts drifted back to Rick, his promise. "I'll be right here." She pictured him boarding his private jet at Teterboro, settling into a cream leather seat, perhaps already on a conference call with the Swiss consortium. She pictured him landing in Geneva, the crisp mountain air, the swift closing of a deal that would secure their future forever. She pictured him racing back his heart with her, just as he said. 99. The operating room was a hive of controlled activity. Dr. Sharma and her team worked with the precision of master watchmakers. The surgery was a marvel of modern medicine, a minimally invasive procedure that involved making a tiny incision in the uterus to reach the placenta and correct the vascular issue that was threatening Arthur's growth. Every movement was guided by high-resolution ultrasound. Every vital sign monitored on a bank of screens that beeped and flashed in a steady, life-affirming rhythm. Hours passed. The team worked tirelessly navigating the delicate microscopic world of an unborn child. They were fighting for 2 lives, a battle waged with scalpels no bigger than an eyelash and sutures as fine as silk. Outside, the sterile bubble of the OR life went on. In the waiting room, Cordelia's mother Helen wrung her hands, sipping lukewarm coffee, while Alistair Finch sat stiffly in a chair, checking his phone with grim regularity, his face unreadable. Back in the operating room, Dr. Sharma made the final, crucial repair. A collective muted sigh of relief went through the team. "Closure," she commanded, her voice calm but triumphant. The most dangerous part was over. Mother and child were stable. The long night was coming to an end. 98. Cordelia whispered in the depths of her unconscious mind. She was in their apartment. Rick was there, holding a tiny baby wrapped in a blue blanket. Arthur. He was smiling, his familiar, dazzling smile. "See Cora," he said, his voice echoing as if in a vast chamber. "I told you everything would be fine. I'm right here." He leaned in to kiss her, but his face began to distort, the features melting like wax. His smile twisted into a sneer. The baby in his arms vanished. The penthouse walls dissolved, replaced by an endless, empty darkness. A cold, terrifying void opened up beneath her, and she was falling. 97. A single tear escaped her closed eye and traced a path down her temple as the drugs held her fast in their chemical embrace, blissfully unaware that the promise, the man, and the world she knew were already gone. The longest night of her life was not the one spent on the operating table, but the one that was just beginning to dawn. Consciousness returned not as a sudden jolt, but as a slow, creeping tide. It began with an awareness of sound, the soft, rhythmic beep of a machine, the distant murmur of voices, the whisper of rubber-soled shoes on linoleum. Then came sensation, the dull, throbbing ache in her abdomen, the scratchiness of the sheets, the dry, papery feel of her own tongue. Cordelia's eyelids were heavy, glued shut with the residue of sleep and anesthesia. She forced them open, blinking against the muted afternoon light, filtering through the blinds of her private room. The first thing she saw was the IV stand beside her bed, clear bags dripping fluid into a tube taped to her hand. The second thing she saw was the empty chair beside her bed. The chair where Rick was supposed to be. A flutter of panic, swift and sharp, pierced through the fog in her brain. "Rick," she croaked, her voice a rough, unused thing. A nurse she hadn't seen before, a kind-faced woman with her name Seraphina Croft embroidered on her scrubs, bustled in. "Mrs. Sterling, you're awake. That's wonderful. How are you feeling?" "Where's my husband?" Cordelia asked, her voice gaining a little strength. "And the baby is Arthur. Is he okay?" The nurse's smile was warm and immediate. The surgery was a complete success, a textbook case. "Your son is a little champion. He's stable and resting in the NICU. You can see him as soon as you're feeling a bit stronger." Relief washed over Cordelia so intensely it left her dizzy. Arthur was safe. The nightmare was over. But the relief was instantly soured by the persistent gnawing question. "My husband? Richard? He was supposed to be here. Did he call his flight from Geneva?" Nurse Croft's professional smile tightened almost imperceptibly at the edges. She busied herself checking Cordelia's vitals, her movements a little too deliberate. "Your mother was here all morning. She just stepped out to get some lunch. She said to tell you she loves you." But Rick Cordelia insisted, trying to push herself up on her elbows. A sharp pain shot through her abdomen, and she gasped, falling back against the pillows. He promised he'd be here. "Just rest, Mrs. Sterling," the nurse said, her tone gentle but evasive. "The doctor will be in to see you shortly. Let's get you some ice chips for your throat." She scurried out of the room, leaving Cordelia alone with the beeping machine and the deafening silence from the empty chair. Panic began to coil in her stomach, again cold and heavy. Something was wrong. The nurse's evasion, the careful way she avoided the question, it wasn't normal. Rick would have moved heaven and earth to be here. He would have called 100 times. He would have sent flowers, an avalanche of them. The room was stark, devoid of any personal touch, save for the overnight bag her mother had packed for her. She fumbled for the call button, her fingers weak and clumsy. Her mind raced through 1,000 terrifying possibilities. The plane. Was there an accident? A mechanical failure? Was he hurt? Was he... No. She couldn't let her mind go there. A few minutes later, the door opened again, but it wasn't her mother or the doctor. It was a man she had never seen before. He was tall and impeccably dressed in a dark, tailored suit that whispered of Savile Row and old money. His hair was a distinguished salt and pepper, his features sharp and patrician. He moved with a quiet, predatory grace, closing the door softly behind him. But it was his eyes that held her captive. They were a cool, startling grey like a winter sky, and they regarded her with an unnerving, analytical calm. He looked completely out of place in the cheerful hospital room. He walked over to the empty chair, Rick's chair, and sat down, placing a slim leather briefcase on the floor beside him. He didn't smile. He didn't introduce himself. He simply sat, his hands resting on his knees, and watched her. Cordelia stared back, a mixture of fear and confusion churning within her. Who are you?" she managed to ask. "Are you from the airline? Is my husband? Is Richard okay?" The man's expression remained unchanged. His voice, when he finally spoke, was low and measured a baritone that seemed to absorb all the sound in the room. "Richard is not on a plane, Mrs. Sterling. He never went to Geneva." The words hung in the air, nonsensical. "What are you talking about?" Of course he did. He had a meeting with the Swiss consortium. Her voice trailed off as she saw the absolute certainty in his gaze. He wasn't lying. He wasn't mistaken. "There is no Swiss consortium." The man stated each word a precise, deliberate blow. The meeting was a fiction. "No." Cordelia whispered, shaking her head, a desperate denial rising in her throat. "You're wrong. You're mistaken." "Who are you? I want you to leave." "My name is Nathaniel Blackwood," he said, as if the name itself should explain everything. To Cordelia, it meant nothing. But the weight with which he said it implied it should. "And I'm afraid, Mrs. Sterling, that your husband is gone. He has vanished." Cordelia felt the room tilt, the steady beeping of the heart monitor, seeming to grow louder, faster, a frantic counterpoint to the blood pounding in her ears. Vanished. What do you mean, vanished? People don't just vanish. Did you call the police? We need to call the police. Nathaniel Blackwood leaned forward slightly, his grey eyes pinning her to the bed. Oh, the police are looking for him. So is the FBI. And Interpol. He paused, letting the gravity of his words sink in. Your husband didn't just leave for a business trip, Mrs. Sterling. He ran. The world constricted to the four walls of the hospital room, to the calm, implacable face of the stranger in the chair. Cordelia's mind reeled, refusing to process his words. Interpol, the FBI. It was a nightmare, a grotesque misunderstanding. Rick Herr. Rick was a brilliant CEO, a philanthropist, a man who sat on the board of the City Ballet. He wasn't a criminal. I don't understand, she said, her voice a fragile whisper. There has to be a mistake. Rick wouldn't. Run. Nathaniel Blackwood reached down and picked up a remote control from the bedside table. With a soft click, the large flat-screen television mounted on the wall flickered to life. It was tuned to a 24-hour news network. The breaking news banner at the bottom of the screen told a story, that made the air leave her lungs. Tech mogul Richard Sterling vanishes amidst massive fraud probe at Sterling Innovations. A picture of Rick smiling at a recent gala was displayed next to the anchor's grim face. Cordelia's own image flashed on the screen for a moment, a candid shot of her and Rick leaving a restaurant, her hand resting on her pregnant belly. Authorities have issued a warrant for the arrest of Richard Sterling, 38, the celebrated founder of Sterling Innovations. The anchor reported his voice crisp and professional. Sources within the SEC confirm that Sterling is the primary subject of an investigation into an alleged multi-year, multi-billion-dollar Ponzi scheme. Sterling, along with his chief operating officer Zara Vance, is believed to have fled the country early this morning. Zara Vance. The name hit Cordelia like a physical blow. The text message. Wheels up at 6 a.m. See you on the other side. It wasn't about a business deal. It was about this. An escape. No. She breathed, her eyes fixed on the screen. No, no, no. Nathaniel muted the television, plunging the room back into a heavy silence, broken only by Cordelia's ragged breathing. He planned this, she said, the horrifying realization dawning. The surgery. He knew I'd be in surgery. It was the perfect time, the perfect alibi for his absence, the perfect cover for his disappearance. His concern, his promises, his tender goodbye kiss. All of it had been a lie, a meticulously crafted performance. He is a man of remarkable foresight. Nathaniel agreed, his tone devoid of any sympathy. It was a simple statement of fact. Why are you here? Cordelia demanded, a surge of anger cutting through her shock. Who are you to him? I am, or rather was, his primary investor. Nathaniel explained coolly. My firm, Blackwood Capital, provided the seed money that launched Sterling Innovations. I owned a 40% stake in the company, a company which, as of this morning, appears to be a hollow shell. Its assets systematically drained over the past 18 months. The puzzle pieces clicked into place, forming a picture of monstrous betrayal. Nathaniel Blackwood wasn't a harbinger of bad news. He was a victim just like her. A far wealthier, more powerful victim, but a victim nonetheless. He hadn't come out of concern for her. He had come because his world, like hers, had been upended by Richard Sterling. He took your money, she stated numbly. He took a lot of my money. Nathaniel corrected, a flicker of something hard and dangerous in his eyes, along with the money of every other person who believed in his vision. He didn't just embezzle funds, Mrs. Sterling. He fabricated earnings reports, created fictitious clients, and sold a revolutionary algorithm that my tech analysts now believe was largely vaporware. It was a brilliant, elegant, and devastatingly effective fraud. Cordelia squeezed her eyes shut, trying to reconcile the man he was describing with the man she had married. The man who read poetry to her, who knew her coffee order by heart, who had cried with joy when they first heard their son's heartbeat. How could both men be the same person? The penthouse, she whispered, her thoughts scattering. The accounts. Our money. Nathaniel's expression was grim. The apartment was leased, not owned. The lease was terminated this morning. Your joint bank accounts were emptied via a wire transfer to a Cayman Islands account at 5:47 a.m. The art, the cars, the jewelry he gifted you, all purchased with stolen funds. They will be seized by federal authorities as assets in the investigation. He paused, delivering the final crushing blow. As far as the law is concerned, Mrs. Sterling, you have nothing. Less than nothing, in fact. Rick was also kind enough to leave behind a mountain of corporate debt, some of which he secured with personal guarantees that you co-signed. The room began to spin. The pain in her abdomen flared a sharp reminder of her physical vulnerability. She had co-signed dozens of documents over the years: loan applications, investment forms, partnership agreements. Rick had always called it a formality. Just sign here, honey. Standard procedure. She had trusted him implicitly, her pen stroking across the pages without a second thought, sealing her own financial ruin. She looked at Nathaniel Blackwood, at his cold, unpitying eyes. He wasn't there to comfort her. He wasn't an ally. He was a predator who had lost his prey, and now he was circling the den, assessing what was left. "So you've come to collect," she said, her voice laced with a bitterness that surprised her. "Is that it? To tell the pregnant wife of the man who conned you that you're taking the bed she's lying in?" For the first time, a flicker of something unreadable passed over Nathaniel's face. He leaned back in the chair, steepling his fingers. "On the contrary, Mrs. Sterling," he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial hush, "I'm here to make you a proposition." The word proposition hung in the sterile air, heavy with unspoken implications. Cordelia stared at him, her mind a maelstrom of grief and fury. A proposition. What could she possibly have that this man, this titan of finance, could possibly want? She was destitute, betrayed and physically broken, tethered to a hospital bed by tubes and wires. "I have nothing to offer you," she said, her voice flat. "Your own words." "You are mistaken." Nathaniel countered, his gaze sharp and calculating. "You have two things of immense value. First, you are Richard Sterling's wife. In the eyes of the world and the law, you were his closest confidant. You shared his home, his life. It is presumed you know things, his habits, his contacts, his secrets." "If I knew his secrets, I wouldn't be here," she retorted, gesturing weakly at her surroundings. Perhaps he conceded. Or perhaps you are a more talented actress than he was an actor. It matters little what is true. It matters what is perceived. The second thing you have is his son. Cordelia's blood ran cold. A primal protective instinct flared within her so fierce it momentarily eclipsed her pain. Her hand moved instinctively to her bandaged abdomen. "You will not involve my child in this." "He is already involved," Nathaniel stated, his voice devoid of emotion. "He is Richard Sterling's only heir. That fact alone makes him a significant asset." "He is not an asset," she hissed. "He is my baby." Semantics. Nathaniel dismissed with a slight wave of his hand. "Listen to me carefully, Mrs. Sterling. Richard did not just steal from me. He made me look like a fool. Nathaniel Blackwood does not suffer fools. My reputation, the very foundation upon which my empire is built, is one of meticulous due diligence and unshakable judgment. Richard has tarnished that. I will not allow that to stand. I will find him, and I will dismantle his life as thoroughly as he attempted to dismantle my portfolio." His words were delivered with a chilling intensity, a promise of cold, methodical revenge. He was known in financial circles as the Architect, a name earned for his ability to both construct and demolish corporate structures with breathtaking precision. Cordelia was now seeing the demolition expert firsthand. "This is where you come in," he continued, leaning forward again. "The authorities will move slowly, bound by bureaucracy and jurisdiction. I am not. I have resources they can only dream of. But they have something I do not: public sympathy. A pregnant wife abandoned and betrayed on the day of a critical surgery. You are a media darling in the making. A tragic, compelling figure." Cordelia felt a wave of nausea. He was talking about her life as if it were a strategy, a public relations campaign. "I have no interest in being a media darling," she said. "Your interest is irrelevant," he replied bluntly. "It is what you are. My proposal is this: you will cooperate with me. Exclusively. You will not speak to the FBI, the SEC, or any reporter without my counsel present. In return, I will provide for you. I will cover all your medical expenses, past and future. I will secure the finest legal representation for you, a team led by a man named Alistair Finch." Cordelia's head snapped up. Alistair Finch? He was Rick's lawyer. He was in the waiting room this morning. Yes, a pragmatic man. His loyalty was to the money, not the man. "Now it's my money," Nathaniel said, without a hint of irony. "Mr. Finch will insulate you from the debts Richard has burdened you with, navigating you through the inevitable bankruptcy proceedings. I will also provide you with a secure residence, a place where you and your son can live away from the prying eyes of the press and the questions of federal agents. I will give you a stipend for your living expenses. In short, I will ensure your survival and your son's." It was a lifeline. A devil's bargain, perhaps, but a lifeline nonetheless. He was offering her a shield from the storm that had just broken over her life. But what was the price, and what do you want from me in return for this generosity? She asked, the word tasting like ash in her mouth. "Information," he said simply. "Everything you know about Richard, every friend he ever mentioned, every late-night phone call you overheard, every odd transaction you might have noticed. We will go through your memories with a fine-toothed comb. You may know more than you think, and you will be my public face in this matter. When the time is right, you will give interviews curated by my team. You will tell your story. You will help me control the narrative. You will help me smoke him out." He wanted to use her, to weaponize her pain, her story, her son, to turn her into a pawn in his high-stakes game of revenge and recovery. She looked at his cold, calculating eyes and saw the ruthlessness that had surely made him a billionaire. He was no better than Rick, just on the other side of the crime. But what choice did she have? She was alone, penniless and responsible for a fragile new life. Her family had little money. They couldn't protect her from the fallout of a multi-billion-dollar scandal. The federal government would see her as a potential accomplice. The world would see her as either a fool or a co-conspirator. Nathaniel Blackwood was offering her the one thing she desperately needed: a sanctuary. A gilded cage, perhaps, but a cage that would protect her from the wolves gathering outside. "And if I refuse?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Nathaniel Blackwood stood up, his tall frame seeming to block out the light from the window. He looked down at her, his expression unreadable. "Then Mr. Finch will represent my interests in seizing any and all assets, including those you may try to claim are yours. The hospital will be informed that your benefactor has withdrawn his support, and you will be presented with a bill that will take you several lifetimes to pay. The FBI will be encouraged to look at you not as a victim, but as a person of interest. And you, Mrs. Sterling, will face the world utterly and completely alone." He picked up his briefcase. "You have until your mother returns to decide. I suggest you choose Weasley." The choice Cordelia knew was no choice at all. When her mother Helen returned with a cup of lukewarm tea and a face etched with worry, she found her daughter pale but resolute. The news had broken while she was in the cafeteria, and she was bracing herself to comfort a shattered woman, Instead, she found a woman who looked like a soldier, surveying a battlefield. "There's a man," Cordelia said, her voice steady. "His name is Nathaniel Blackwood. He's going to help us." Helen looked bewildered, but Cordelia offered no further explanation. When Nathaniel returned, she simply nodded at him. The deal was struck. The days that followed were a surreal blur. While Cordelia recovered from her surgery, her hospital suite became the headquarters for her new life. Alistair Finch, the lawyer who had once served her husband's interests, now sat by her bedside, his demeanor just as stoic, but his allegiance clearly shifted. He explained the legal labyrinth she was in with dispassionate clarity. The co-signed documents were ironclad. She was personally liable for tens of millions of dollars in corporate loans. Bankruptcy was not a possibility. It was a certainty. Under Nathaniel's direction, Finch began the process creating a legal firewall around Cordelia. Every communication was routed through him. The FBI agents who came to question her were met by Alistair, who politely informed them that his client was recovering from major surgery and would provide a statement at a later, more appropriate time. Each day, Cordelia was allowed to visit Arthur in the NICU. He was so small, impossibly so, his tiny body, a tangle of wires and tubes inside his incubator. Looking at his perfect miniature features, she felt a resolve harden within her. This was not just about her survival anymore. It was about his. He would not grow up in the shadow of his father's sins. She would not let him. During the long hours by his side, her mind sifted through the wreckage of her marriage, searching for the red flags she had so willfully ignored. The memories once cherished were now tainted clues in a crime she hadn't known was being committed. There was the time she'd stumbled upon a second set of ledgers in Rick's home office. When she'd asked about them, he'd laughed. "Creative accounting, honey. A little something for the IRS, a little something for us. Everyone does it." He'd been so charming, so dismissive of her concern that she'd accepted the explanation. There were the offshore holding companies he'd set up, which he'd described as tax efficiency strategies. He'd even had her named as a director on one of them, a company registered in Panama. "It's just a title, Cora. It means nothing," he'd assured her as she signed the papers. Alistair Finch now informed her that this shell company had been used to launder millions of dollars. With Nathaniel's team of forensic accountants, a clearer picture of Rick's deception emerged. It was a web of staggering complexity. But as they dug deeper, a new, more sinister thread appeared, one that went beyond financial fraud. One of Nathaniel's investigators, a former MI6 agent named Gavin, uncovered a trust. "It's an old family trust on his mother's side," Gavin explained via a secure video call, his British accent clipped and precise. "The Sterling family was old money, before Richard made his own fortune. The trust is worth approximately $50 million. But there are conditions. A bloodline clause." He couldn't touch the principal. Nathaniel clarified, picking up the thread. He was in the room with Cordelia observing the call, not until he produced a legitimate biological heir. The air in the room grew thin. Cordelia felt a cold dread creep up her spine. "Arthur," she whispered. "Precisely," Gavin confirmed. "The trust stipulates that upon the birth of his firstborn son, the funds become accessible. But there's more. The money was to be transferred to a new account, one controlled solely by the heir's legal guardians, that is Richard and you. The paperwork to establish this new account was filed 3 months ago. It was set to become active upon the official registration of a birth certificate." The full horrifying scope of Rick's plan slammed into Cordelia. His desperation for a child hadn't been about starting a family. Arthur hadn't been a beloved, longed-for son. He was a key, a $50 million key. "He was planning this all along," she said, her voice shaking with a rage so profound it almost choked her. He needed a baby, a legitimate heir, to unlock that money. The money he would use for his new life after the company collapsed. It would appear, so Nathaniel said, his voice unusually quiet. He was watching her, his grey eyes assessing her reaction. "And me?" she asked the question, tearing from her throat. What was his plan for me? The silence that followed was the answer. She was collateral damage. A vessel. Once the baby was born and the trust was unlocked, she would have been a liability. A loose end. He wouldn't have just left her with debt. The timing of the surgery took on a terrifying new significance. It wasn't just a cover for his escape. It was a moment of extreme vulnerability for both her and the baby. Had the surgery gone wrong? Had she not made it? Rick would have become a grieving widower, a single father with sole custody of the heir and sole access to the $50 million trust. He would have been pitied, not suspected. The man she had loved, the man she had built a life with, had not only been prepared to abandon her, he may very well have been hoping for her death. The lie was so monstrous, so complete, that it almost defied belief. Her marriage, her pregnancy, the love she thought they shared, it was all a fabrication, a long con to get his hands on a pot of gold. He had been acting for years. Cordelia looked from Nathaniel's grim face to the photo of Arthur on her phone. The anger coalesced into something hard and sharp inside her chest. It was no longer just about survival. It was about justice. Rick hadn't just stolen money. He had stolen her life, her trust, her past. He had tried to turn her son into a pawn and her into a casualty. "Find him," she said to Nathaniel, her voice low and venomous, devoid of any of its previous fragility. "I don't care what it takes or what it costs. Find him." Nathaniel Blackwood gave a slow, deliberate nod. For the first time, he looked at her not as a pawn or an asset, but as something else entirely, an ally. That he said a ghost of a smile touching his lips was never in doubt. The day Cordelia was discharged from Lenox Hill, the sky over Manhattan was a brilliant, achingly cloudless blue. It felt like a personal insult, a world flaunting a beauty she could no longer feel. The simple act of leaving the hospital was a complex, clandestine operation, orchestrated by Nathaniel Blackwood's invisible hand. There was no triumphant walk out the main entrance. Instead, she was guided through a series of service corridors, the scent of bleach and floor wax replacing the antiseptic air of her room. She sat in the wheelchair, a requirement of hospital policy, but it felt like a symbol of her own fragility. Yet in her arms, she held a universe of strength. Arthur, wrapped tightly in a soft cashmere blanket, was a warm, solid weight against her chest. His tiny rhythmic breaths were the only sound that seemed real. He was the anchor in her swirling chaos. That woman, the one who had checked in as Mrs. Richard Sterling, a name synonymous with tech royalty and philanthropic galas, had died somewhere between the anesthesia and the betrayal. The woman being wheeled out, now dressed in simple clothes, procured by an unknown assistant, was someone else entirely. Someone harder, colder, and forged in the unblinking fire of truth. At a discreet loading bay, a black Escalade waited its engine, humming silently, its tinted windows reflecting the world back at itself, impenetrable and opaque. The driver, a large man with a thick neck and a fading scar that snaked from his ear to his jaw, got out and opened the door without a word. He moved with the quiet efficiency of a man accustomed to handling precious, fragile cargo. This was Nathaniel Blackwood's world, now a world of silent professionals, tactical precision, and deep, unnerving shadows. The Escalade whisked them away from the Upper East Side, leaving the last vestiges of her former life behind. She didn't look back. There was nothing to see but a ghost town of memories. The vehicle moved west toward the Hudson River, eventually pulling into the stark concrete entrance of a private garage beneath a gleaming glass tower in Hudson Yards. Nathaniel was waiting for them, standing beside the elevator bay, his posture as severe and unyielding as the building around them. "Welcome," he said, his voice echoing slightly in the cavernous space. It wasn't a welcome to a home, but an induction into a new reality. He led her to a private elevator that opened directly into a sprawling apartment on the 78th floor. The view was the first thing that hit her, a panoramic vista of the river and the city that was even more commanding than the one from her old penthouse. But this was a cold, corporate beauty. The apartment was a masterpiece of minimalist design, all sharp angles, cool tones, and polished surfaces. It smelled of new paint and expensive leather, an anonymous, uninhabited scent. It was not a home. It was a holding cell, a gilded core designed for absolute security. The building has the best residential security system in the city. Nathaniel explained, his voice a low monotone, as he gave her the tour. The elevators are biometric, keyed only to my prints, and as of 5 minutes ago, yours. All windows are ballistic glass. There is a staff on my payroll, a driver, a nanny, and a cook who will be at your disposal. They have all been thoroughly vetted and have signed non-disclosure agreements, thicker than a novel. Vetted Cordelia knew meant they were his eyes and ears. Her keepers. My prison, she stated, her voice flat. She walked across the vast living room to the floor-to-ceiling window, bouncing a slightly fussy Arthur on her shoulder. The city below looked like a circuit board, a network of impersonal connections, a sanctuary. Nathaniel corrected his tone, unwavering. He came to stand beside her, his reflection a dark spectre in the glass. Richard Sterling made powerful enemies Mrs. Sterling. I am merely the one with the most vested interest in his capture. The others, he swindled construction magnates, Russian oligarchs, pension fund managers, might not to be as methodical in their pursuit of justice. You and your son are loose ends. You need to be protected. She knew he was right, but the protection felt suffocating. The first few weeks were an exercise in controlled monotony. The nanny, a stern but impeccably capable woman from Austria, named Maria, handled Arthur with a professionalism that bordered on clinical. The cook prepared nutritionally balanced meals that Cordelia ate without tasting. Her days found a new grim rhythm. Mornings were for Arthur. Afternoons were for the war room. Nathaniel had converted one of the spare bedrooms into a command center. Here she met daily with Alistair Finch and a rotating team of Nathaniel's investigators led by the unflappable ex-MI6 agent Gavin. Surrounded by whiteboards, financial charts, and satellite maps, Cordelia methodically dissected her life with Rick. It was excruciating, like performing an autopsy on her own heart. Think Cordelia Gavin would press his British accent, always polite, even when he was relentless. Did he ever mention offshore banking? Any specific countries? Even as a joke. One afternoon, staring at a list of shell corporations, one name, Argos Maritime, triggered a memory. He was on the phone late one night, she said, slowly closing her eyes to picture it. He was angry. He said something about The Argos deal is leaking like a sieve. We need a Cypriot firewall. She'd assumed it was business jargon. Now she repeated the words, and Gavin's pen flew across his notepad. Each memory was a weapon. Each forgotten detail a bullet. She worked with a ferocity that surprised even herself, fueled by a cold, simmering rage. This was not grief. Grief was a luxury she couldn't afford. This was a reckoning. One evening, Nathaniel found her in the command center, long after the others had left. She was staring at a large map of the Mediterranean, a single red pin stuck in the island of Cyprus. Arthur was asleep in his bassinet, beside the desk, a small island of peace in a sea of conspiracy. "You've adapted," he observed, pouring himself a glass of water from a pitcher on the credenza. "Adaptation is a necessity for survival," she replied, her gaze fixed on the map. "I learned that from my husband. He adapted from a loving husband to a monster quite seamlessly." He was silent for a moment, studying her profile. "Alistair informed me that the final bankruptcy papers were filed today. You are cleared of all personal debt. In the eyes of the law, you are free." "I won't be free until he's found," she said, finally turning to meet his gaze. Her eyes, he noted, were different now. The soft, trusting warmth was gone, replaced by a sharp, intelligent fire that seemed to see right through him. "What's our next move?" She had started saying "our," and it was no longer an accident. "My people have confirmed the lead," he said, his voice lowering. "A significant cash withdrawal was made from an account in Nicosia linked to Zara Vance. It was sloppy, desperate. They're getting comfortable, or they're running out of clean money. We're moving on it." Cordelia felt a familiar surge of adrenaline, but it was tempered now with cold strategy. They'll run again. He'll have contingencies for his contingencies. "We will be waiting," Nathaniel assured her. He was about to say more, but he stopped, his gaze falling on the sleeping baby. Arthur stirred his little hand, clenching and unclenching around the edge of his blanket. For all the talk of assets and heirs, he was just a child, perfect and innocent. Cordelia followed his gaze, and her expression transformed. All the hardness, all the anger melted away as she looked at her son. He was the one pure, true thing to come out of the wreckage. Rick had seen him as a key. Nathaniel saw him as leverage. But she saw him as her entire world. He was her reason, her motivation. Rick and Nathaniel were playing a game of billions of revenge and reputation. But her fight was for something far more valuable. She reached down and gently stroked Arthur's cheek with the back of her finger. Her resolve hardened once more. But this time it was different. It wasn't just about anger. It was about fierce, unyielding love. She turned back to Nathaniel, her voice quiet, but carrying the weight of an unbreakable vow. "When you find him," she said, "I want to be there. I don't mean in the country. I mean in the room. I want him to look me in the eye when his world comes crashing down." Nathaniel raised an eyebrow. "That would be irregular and dangerous." "It's non-negotiable," she countered, her voice like steel. "You want to dismantle his finances. I want to dismantle him. He needs to see that his greatest victim, the woman he left for dead, was instrumental in his downfall. He needs to see Arthur, the son he tried to use as a bank key, thriving in my arms. That is a punishment no court can deliver. That is the justice I will have. Without it, your victory is incomplete." Nathaniel Blackwood looked at the woman before him, the mother protecting her child. The survivor forged in betrayal, and he saw not a pawn, but a queen dictating the terms of surrender. He saw a partner whose motivations were now as pure and as dangerous as his own. He gave a slow, respectful nod. The battle was far from over. In fact, it had just begun. Cordelia's journey has just begun. The woman who entered that operating theatre is gone, replaced by a survivor forged in the fires of betrayal. With the enigmatic Nathaniel Blackwood as both her keeper and her key, she stands at a precipice. Will she reclaim the life that was stolen from her, or will she build a new one from the ashes, more powerful than before? The battle against Richard Sterling isn't just about money. It's about justice, survival, and the fierce, unyielding love for her child. What do you think she should do next? Let us know in the comments below. If you were captivated by Cordelia's story of survival and deception, please hit that like button, share this video with someone who loves a good drama, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next chapter of this incredible saga.